Good afternoon and welcome to my show, Justice Matters. I'm Patty Corrales, as many of you know, and today we have a fantastic show, and I have with me a wonderful colleague. I want to introduce her to all of the community. I have Nora Phillips, who used to be an attorney with Corrales. Can you please introduce yourself to the community?
Sure. So my name is Nora Phillips, and I was a staff attorney until very recently with the Central American Resource Center, also known as Corrales, for approximately 4 years. Prior to that, I was an Equal Justice Works Fellow at the Legal Assistance Foundation of Metropolitan Chicago. At LAF, I focused mainly on the U visa for victims of violent crimes, and then when I transitioned over to Corrales, I continued doing my U visa work as well as work in VAWA, and then for the last year and a half or so, I was supervising or coordinating all of the services related to Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, otherwise known as DACA.
And now you're on your own.
And now I'm on my own. Now I'm in private practice with Phillips and Urias. I have a wonderful partner who also comes from a nonprofit background, and we are now doing full scope representation for immigration cases before USCIS and EOIR.
Well, fantastic. Yeah. I want to just let the community know that Nora is well known for her advocacy with U visas, VAWAs, and deferred action applicants. And today on my show, we're going to talk about deferred action because guess what? It's almost 2 years since June 12, 2012, when President Obama announced deferred action for young childhood arrivals. And many of you who were early recipients of DACA are getting close to that 2-year mark, and now you're probably wondering, what do I do next? Do I apply again, or what are the new procedures? So we're going to talk about that on my show. And as many of you know in the community, I used to work for ICE. I was a former senior attorney for ICE. So Nora and I, although we've never saw each other in court or battled in court, we're going to discuss the pros and cons and the issues that we have seen since deferred action was first, if you will, instituted in June 12, 2012. And I want to remind everybody first that deferred action is not a change in the law, and it is not a substantive change in the law. So there are issues where you cannot appeal certain denials of deferred action. But it is a way for many of our young youth to obtain some sort of ability to work legally in the United States and to obtain a driver's license and go to school, because it opens up doors, doesn't it, Nora?
It certainly does.
So can you share with us what, I know that just recently USCIS announced the new renewed, if you will, the guidelines for the renewed applications for deferred action.
Right. So right now, the only people that are eligible to apply for deferred action renewal are people who were granted deferred action by ICE. And it's a really small group of people that were approved anytime between like June 16th of 2012 and August 15th. It's a really small group of people. The bulk of people were granted deferred action by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, about 500,000 people. And so their renewal periods are coming up. So it's going to be a rolling renewal period. So right now you can still apply for deferred action, which means you're going to be 2.5 years away from having to even worry about renewal. But we have a large group of people that are going to be coming up on that, and probably sometime around maybe September, they're going to be ready to start that renewal process. At the beginning, DACAs were getting processed very, very quickly. That sort of slowed down. So it's going to be rolling, but I think the first sort of wave of people that are going to be eligible to renew, that's going to be happening sometime around September.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's break that up just a little bit so that everybody kind of can digest this information. So if you were one of the very first recipients that obtained deferred action in June of 2012 up until August 13, when they actually opened up the DACA process, your DACA application was approved by ICE.
Correct.
So if you, and I believe that they've set forth renewal guidelines for those individuals, correct?
Right. So they're going to have to be, they're going to have to apply to USCIS. So ICE is no longer handling these. And there isn't a renewal form available yet. It's probably going to be published sometime in April. So since those cases are not that numerous, obviously if you were granted deferred action by ICE, you need to talk to an immigration attorney or a BIA accredited representative, and they can sort of shepherd you through that process, which is probably going to involve just refiling the I-821D, even though it hasn't been revised yet, or the revised version hasn't been published yet. But yeah, so it's a limited number of people that are going to be eligible to do it now. And if you do have DACA, you should look at your work permit, and that's going to have the 2-year validity window. And so the, valid from date to date, you want to look at that to date. And if that's coming up, you need to contact an attorney, go back to the attorney that helped you, whatever, to go ahead and start that renewal process.
Let me ask you something.
Okay.
I think you bring up a very good point, and I want to make certain that our community, particularly our Latino community, is aware of the fact that in all probability, they're going to have to do the same thing they did and present the same sort of evidence that they did when they first applied for DACA.
Right.
And the fees are going to be the same,
They're
correct?
the same. It's still $465. There is a fee exemption available, but it's very, very, very difficult to get. It's not like a fee waiver.
Okay, so the fees change. The fees don't change.
Fees don't change.
All right. And how soon can you renew? You
cannot apply to renew until 120 days before the expiration of your status. So, for example, right now it's March 14th, roughly 4 months. So if your status is expiring in July, this would be the earliest point at which you could apply for renewal.
All right, and that's good to know as well. But you can actually apply later than that, right?
Yes.
The soonest is 120 days.
Correct.
4 months.
Correct. And it usually, the processing times for work permits differ pretty widely. Sometimes it takes only, a month, and sometimes it can take up to 4 months. So I would encourage all people to apply as early as possible within that 120 days.
Okay. Now, another thing that you mentioned, and I want to make certain that our community understands this, is this renewal guidance that we've received from USCIS are for many of those who already have deferred action, but it's still not late.
No.
To apply for
Not
deferred
at all.
action in the first place.
Not at all. I have clients right now who are applying for the very first time, and that's totally fine. There has been a huge amount of misinformation to the community about, we used to get calls almost on a weekly basis saying two things: that deferred action was done, and that once you turn 30, you couldn't qualify anymore. So those are wrong. You can apply for the very first time right now for deferred action. For people that have had it for almost 2 years now, those are going to be the people that are renewing, but there was no deadline by which you had to apply initially. So you can still apply for the very first time now.
And that's important to know, because there's still people out there afraid to apply.
Correct,
because
yeah.
for whatever reason they've received information that this is a way that ICE will get a hold of them or their family.
Right.
And we have seen now for the last 2 years that really isn't the case.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
It's not happening. I completely understand the mistrust, but it's not happening.
So, and that's good that we just make it clear it is not happening. Now, it does happen though if there's certainly if you don't go to a reputable lawyer or a licensed lawyer and someone submits information that's incorrect or fraudulent in your in your DACA application.
That's correct.
I have known people who have been placed in proceedings to be deported because of that. But
right.
Those are the rare numbers.
Right. And there are also people who should not be applying for DACA in the first place. It's quite strict in terms of eligibility for criminal convictions. Not all criminal convictions are going to, I've filed plenty of cases for people that have criminal convictions. It's what type of criminal conviction is it? So some people, if they came to my office, given their criminal history, if it's pretty extensive, I would recommend that they not apply. Okay. So there are some people that, for example, have, let's say they have a domestic violence conviction, and it was recent. That person, if they came into my office and asked, if they should apply for DACA, I would probably advise them that they would not be safe for them to apply for DACA, because that's one of the offenses that renders you ineligible, absent exceptional circumstances.
And it also is an offense that could place you in removal proceedings.
Correct. So you always have to think to the think forward, but they could have gone to an attorney or a notario that said, no, you're fine, go ahead and apply. So I've had clients who have had major issues after getting really bad advice, so you just have to be really careful who you get that advice for, and you don't have to return to the attorney that did your initial case either.
Right,
You're the boss,
and that's true.
Yeah,
and I want to talk about some of the criminal issues that we have witnessed in the last 2 years.
Sure.
But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about two things that you mentioned. You said, people getting bad advice that DACA is over. We know that DACA is not over, that you can still apply. The other thing you mentioned is that the community, or some in the community, have heard that if you're over 30 years of age, forget it, can't apply for DACA.
Right.
But wasn't there an age requirement?
There is an age requirement. So as long as you were under 31 by June 15th, 2012, you can qualify.
And what if today you're 33 and you're applying for the first time?
Now, I am a French major, not a math major, but I think that there was the cutoff date. It's easier to calculate it just if you were born on or after a certain date, which I believe was June 16th, 1981. I believe that is. But as long as you were under 31, which means you could have been 30 years old and 364 days old on June 15th of 2012, you're still okay. I had a woman come into my office who'd been told by a different attorney that she did not qualify for DACA because she was too old, and she qualified by 2 days.
Okay.
So
I think let's make this point very clear to our community. So if on June 15th, 2012, an individual was, let's say, 30 years old and 364 days, so before they turn 31, even though they are applying today,
not a problem.
March 14th, 2014, they're still eligible for DACA.
Fine. They're
as long
fine.
as they meet the other requirements.
That's correct.
Okay. And I think that's important to note, because I've had people come to my office saying, I think I was too old. Now, some of them were too old. They were 32 at the time, so they weren't eligible.
Right.
Or they have other issues involved. But that important age requirement needs to be known, because there are so many people that have not applied for deferred action that are maybe 33 years of age today, but were under 30 years of age, or 31 years of age, excuse me, on June 15th, 2012.
It's a purely a question of how old were you on June 15th, 2012, not how old are you now.
Exactly. Okay. So I'm glad we got that clarified for many of our community out there. Now, we've been doing this now 2 years. You've been doing it more than I have. Okay. You are considered an expert with deferred action. Let's talk about the issues we have been seeing and how these issues have affected deferred action. And one of the things I want to start our conversation with is, in the beginning, deferred action application, the process was taken within 5 to 6 months. Now it's backlogged. It's now taking anywhere from longer than 6 months. I've had a case that's pending 9 months, and that's even when I've been contacting the liaison people that I have to talk to at USCIS. Why do you think there's such a backlog? Do you have any idea?
I think that what happened at the very beginning, because we were getting DACA approvals in like a month and a half. It was so fast at the very beginning, because I think that USCIS mobilized so many officers that they were just pulling from different areas of the agency, anticipating this flood of applications. And so they were getting and there was a lot of also political pressure for it. So they were really rapidly adjudicating these cases. Then I think once it started to sort of slow down, they put people back where they were originally, so there were fewer officers. And it was sort of also out of the political spotlight. We have to remember that it was also an election year in 2012. So now you have fewer officers, and you have far less, it's not in the political spotlight anymore. And also the cases, I think, that are getting filed now, average. Of course, I still see cases where it's the kid that just turned 15 that has no issues, and it's a super straightforward case. But some of the cases that are getting filed now are more complicated. So that might be another reason for why, for the delays in adjudication. But yeah, it's very frustrating for clients. I think that, I don't know I haven't checked in the past couple of weeks, but I think that USCIS's official processing times are 6 months. So once my clients hit 6 months, then we go ahead and file an ombudsman's request to investigate.
An inquiry with USCIS. I just had a client whose DACA was approved 2 days ago, and they were pending for 9 months. And I called the contact person at USCIS to say, what's taking so long? But luckily there was nothing wrong. It just was a slow process. Now, so if that happens to you, don't worry. Okay, if your DACA has not been approved quickly and your friend's has, well, your friend's got a lucky officer who happened to do his case really quickly.
It's not all going to the same person. It's going to different parts of the country. Like maybe your friend's was in, Texas, and yours is in Nebraska, and then your other friend's is in Vermont. And
but it's hard to explain.
It's very difficult to explain,
clients.
and I understand how frustrating it is, because they're probably checking the mail every single day because it's huge.
Right.
But yeah, and then also sometimes they will get information from when they go to take their fingerprints. I've had a lot of clients be told by the officers at the fingerprint office, you should get your work permit in a month, and that's not how it happens.
That's not how it happens.
So then you have to sort of deflate those expectations. But I would say, if it takes more than 6 months, then at least you can say it's taking longer than your own stated processing times, and you can start that request. But it's always difficult for clients with with USCIS filings where you file and then there's just this long silence.
Right.
And people want to assume the worst. When actually silence is good. It means that they're not denying it. It means that especially if it's within the processing times. But that's always difficult for clients.
It is.
And I get it. I'm not a patient person myself.
And myself included. And I always tell my clients, if you don't hear from me, that's because nothing has happened
Unless
in your
you changed
case.
your phone number and didn't
Exactly.
tell me.
But be patient.
Yeah.
Be patient with the process. But certainly go to a licensed attorney to make certain that your application is filed correctly in the first instance.
Right. And I would say even beyond that, I would not just a licensed attorney. You want an attorney who's the majority of the cases that they do are immigration. And even within that subset, you want to find somebody who's got experience doing deferred action.
That's correct. Because deferred action has its own issues.
It does.
And let's talk about the other issues. And one of those issues is crimes. Okay. Now, we've been doing this, like I said, 2 years now. And when people come to me and I ask them their criminal history, if I know they have a DUI just will not get you a deferred action approval.
And I actually had the opportunity to sort of test out a case. Another place had filed the DACA request for my client, and she got what's called a NOID, a notice of intent to deny, where you have about 33 days to respond. And they basically said, it looks like you had a DUI, please explain. And so we made an argument that it was the exceptional circumstances. The woman had actually suffered a sexual assault the prior day and had all kinds of really awful things going on in her life. And even with that, they denied it. So if they're going to deny it for her, when she truly had very exceptional circumstances going on in her life at the time of the criminal conviction, then I just don't want to do it with anybody else.
And I think that's a very good point, because if you have a criminal conviction that may be a reason why DACA could be denied, you can always argue exceptional circumstances. Right. But I think our community needs to understand that DACA is a discretionary application. It is not if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to get it automatically. Right. It's discretionary. So if your officer is reviewing the application and the evidence you've presented, and the officer believes that you cannot or have not shown exceptional circumstances, even though you may feel you have, it's going to be denied.
Yeah, and there's really nothing you can do. There's no appeals process for a denied DACA.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, but it's only for service error in terms of the substantive elements of the case, there's no appeal.
Right, and the only option you have is to reapply.
Yeah, and by that point you've spent a lot of money, and you've volunteered all of your biographic information to ICE. Especially, a DUI is different, but if you had a domestic violence conviction or a child sexual abuse conviction, that will render you deportable. Right. So you really want to talk to somebody, an attorney that has experience in this area, before you go ahead and apply.
Domestic violence. I've had a DACA where, before we jump to the domestic violence, I did have a DACA that I applied for and was successful with when it was a wet and reckless is what they call it. Yeah. Which is not technically a DUI, but can be considered by ICE, or excuse me, not by ICE, by USCIS still as an offense similar to DUI. Because if the plea agreement in your wet and reckless has the amount of alcohol you had in your system, USCIS can still consider that, even though the conviction technically is not a DUI. Luckily in my case, we were able to get that approved nonetheless.
And I've heard of a couple of other cases where that is what happened. So I think that people have been having some success with wet reckless convictions. But still, if you have any criminal conviction, for all cases, it's very, very highly recommended that you go to an attorney that has expertise in this area. But especially if you have a criminal history or any of the other things that can kind of make your case more complicated, it's really important that you be advised by an attorney before you file.
One other thing that I want to touch on is in many of my DACAs, not in many, but I should say in some of my DACAs, I've had what's known or called requests for further evidence. Not enough evidence was submitted to establish that the individual was here in the United States. Now, in my practice, I found that many of these young kids were too scared to come out. So they didn't have regular jobs where they got paid in a check form, they got cash, or they didn't establish credit. Someone else took out credit on their name because they were afraid. They didn't have a Social Security. So they don't have a lot of documentary evidence. And in those situations, I've submitted stuff like Facebook postings.
Yeah.
Okay, but certainly Facebook postings that show that you were somewhere in the United States.
Checking in somewhere, right.
I've submitted affidavits of people who've known them. The next door neighbor who can attest that that individual grew up here in the United States. I've noticed that USCIS does not place much emphasis on affidavits.
They don't.
What recommendations do you have for people who don't have that kind of documentary evidence?
You have to get really creative, and I just wanted to clarify with the talking about requests for evidence. So we call them RFEs, which obviously you know. RFEs, they usually give you about 87 days to respond. If you get an RFE, don't ignore it, because then they'll deny your case. So I know that it's really scary if you get something in the mail from immigration, either an RFE or even worse, a notice of intent to deny. It's worse because they're gonna deny it if you don't respond, and you have a third of the time to respond. But just so that everybody knows, if you get one of these things in the mail, just go to an attorney as soon as humanly possible, because I don't like it, and I'm sure you don't like it, when somebody comes to you with an RFE that's due in a week.
Yes.
And you need to get, all kinds of documentation so that you can prepare it well. So if you don't respond, they're going to deny it, and then your only option is to pay the $465, start from square one again. So it's not worth it. So so don't be in denial. Just take it to an attorney. But for the RFEs for continuous physical presence, it's very difficult. Sometimes that you can tell, like, the cases that are going to be relatively straightforward. It's usually for younger kids that are in school. And the transcript satisfies so many of the requirements. But then when you get people that are like 27, 28, it gets, or people that were never in school that came here at a very young age to start working, were paid in cash to support their family members. They're often the saddest stories are the cases where people have like very little documentation. You have to get really, really creative.
Give us some of these creative ideas.
So
because
I always ask
my Facebook postings did not work. I had USCIS say, how do we know that Disneyland was in the United States? I honestly had that as one of my decision-making criteria.
Okay, well, that's interesting for them to say. I have taken, I almost broke our copier at GUTS, and I took large plaques with photos from a baseball team where my client was the coach every single year, and put it in the copier and made copies of the plaques of the photos circling his face. Vet records, I always ask my clients if they have pets, because then we can get letters from the vet's office. The dog isn't going to walk himself to the vet. We've tracked in sign-in sheets for when my clients have gone to pick up younger siblings at school and they have to sign in. Birth control, always ask about birth control. I make all of my clients blush, male and female.
Good point.
Also WIC records. So if clients are on public assistance, if they have kids until I think birth to 5, children can be eligible, or moms can be eligible for the Women, Infant, and Children's Program, which provides some really basic nutrition for pregnant moms and kids until 5. Those records, I always ask for the kids' dates of birth, because if I have a mom that comes into my office and she hasn't worked in the past 6 years, but she's got a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old, she's been receiving WIC, and she's low income, she's been receiving WIC benefits for the past 4 years. And the beauty of WIC is that you have to go into classes, I think once a month, on breastfeeding and nutrition and all kinds of things, and you have to go in and check in. So you can actually go to the WIC office and they'll print out this fabulous list that basically fulfills all of the requirements. So I know immigration attorneys sometimes are skittish about asking about receipt of public benefits because they're freaked out, but that's usually a big myth.
It is a myth, but it also is actually something that you have to think about
Correct.
for future applications, but not for deferred action.
DACA, and if it's WIC or if it's food stamps, never. It's not a problem.
Well, that's a good point, and certainly something that we could talk about
Yeah,
in another
in a
show,
different
but here's, because that's a big issue
It
too.
is.
People are afraid, but I took food stamps, but you took food stamps out for your United States citizen children,
And
which
even
are
if-
entailed to that.
Correct, but even if you took out food stamps for you, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not considered. It's a. I don't know what the exact terminology is, but if you're getting cash or if you're getting long term, there's a huge
Difference between cash and food
right.
stamps.
So Medi-Cal is okay.
Yes.
Food stamps are fine. There's a letter from the district director of USCIS that encourages people within District 23 go and get food stamps if you need them. It's not going to jeopardize your status, but there's so many people. That's a whole other show. We could talk about that all day.
We can, because I want to clarify that myth.
Yeah, it is
out
because
there for the community.
there are a lot of people that are going hungry based on incorrect
because
information.
they're afraid. They
Yeah.
don't want to ruin their chances to
Which
get
I understand, but it's a
residence.
horrible position to
Oh,
be in,
it
and
is.
it's based on false information. So there are people that could be eating more nutritious food right now because of. So let's do another show on that.
We're going to have to
Okay.
do another show
Okay.
on that. Let's go back to
All
what
right.
we were talking about, some creative ideas on how to
So-
supplement your documentation here in the United States. I've got one.
Okay.
I had a case where people didn't really want to, I don't have anything, abogada, I don't have anything
Mm-hmm.
for you. Okay, how many kids do you have? I have 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, their birth certificates count. And guess what? You had to have prenatal visits. Yes.
Right.
Well, go back to the clinic
Yep.
and get
I
a
love medical
log,
records.
a log of every single time you had to go
Yep.
and see your doctor
Yep.
for your prenatal visits.
Yeah.
There is your time.
Right.
They don't think outside the box, okay? Cell phone receipts is one, of course. We know that. Gas receipts, rental receipts, those are the obvious.
Wiring money home is a
Wiring
big one.
money
You can
home.
go to Western Union or MoneyGram and you can usually get a printout of all of the money that you sent home. I had a client, I just remember this when you were telling me this, he was mid-20s, lived with his mom. Mom paid for everything. It's usually more common with the guys than the girls. And he had nothing in his name. And they thought, it's a lost cause. We're not going to be able to apply for this kid. But he loved video games and he ordered stuff all the time on eBay and Amazon. I'm not of the gaming world, so I don't even remember what it was, but all I know and all I care about was that he ordered something that was shipped to his house. So we went through his entire Amazon and eBay history and printed out all of the invoices from past orders showing that it was shipped to his house, which is in the United States.
That is fantastic.
So, and then bank statements obviously
Yeah,
are the
bank
big
statements,
ones. But
right.
that's the best. But yeah, the eBay and the Amazon, thank God for those online shopping habits.
But the thing is, if you have nothing else, and all we can do is get affidavits, and yes, affidavits are okay, they just don't put much value in those.
They don't, but I think, there's an affidavit and there's an affidavit. If
Right.
you have, Jose lived here continuously from 2007 to 2012, that's not going to work. What I get into with clients is, what's your birthday? Stuff that they'll actually remember, stuff that's actually believable. What's your birthday? Oh, my birthday's in April. Okay, do you always celebrate your birthday? Yeah. Do you remember what you did for the past 4 birthdays? Yeah. People will remember that. Okay, cool. So we're going to put that down, and I want, if you had a party every year, I want photos and I want an affidavit from a friend that was present at your birthday party. I want to know, what flavor the cake was. I want details.
Exactly.
So a lot of times people will just write,
I've known Joe Smith since he was 12.
That doesn't work.
That doesn't work. And I'm learning that as well.
Yeah.
I think as practitioners, we learn as well. We communicate with one another. What creative ideas do you have? What creative ideas do you have? And I've just learned some from you, so I'm going to check about my video games. But I want to thank you, Nora, because we could really talk about this subject so much more. But we're limited in our time together. I want to thank you for being on my show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And I want to be able to know, to tell the community how they can reach you if they have any further questions relating to deferred action, U visas, or any immigration related issues. How can they get a hold of you and your partner?
Well, my phone number is 323-300-5018. And we, within the next week or so, will be moving into our office, which is located in Boyle Heights, just east of Mariachi Plaza. So, but feel free to call, even though we're not installed in the new office yet, we're doing consultations and taking on plenty of cases right now. So,
Do you have an email
I do.
address?
So my email is Nora, Nora, at Phillips, PHILLIPS, Urias, URIAS.com.
And if anyone has any further question they can reach me. You know how to reach me. You can reach me at patricia.m.corrales@gmail.com, or you can reach me at 626-791-1434. And thank you for joining me on my show today, and I look forward to talking to you about our next topic.